It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, everybody. Starring the irrepressible Andrew Bernstein and the revitalizing Robert Begley. I am Andrew Bernstein, and you are indubitably Robert Begley. How you doing today, Robert?
I'm doing great today, Andy. Ready for part two of Lord of the Rings and more of Tolkien's life. So let's get to it.
Right. Yeah, let's get to it. Is right. This is magnificent stuff. So we know you're an expert on the trilogy. You said you read it 50 times, 50. Is that right?
If you include all audiobooks and different audio versions, yeah, it's about 50 times. I mean, since
Wow.
I'm
Well,
like
that
13 years old, it's just been that big a part of my life. Yeah. hmm
well, I'm impressed. I mean, no, I mean, and you picked such heroic literature to fall in love with, and and study. So yeah, let's get to it. Like you said, we're on our way. Frodo's on his way to Mordor to Mount Doom to try and destroy the ring. Right?
That's right. He's on his way. The last we left off last time was he was alive, but in the hands of the enemy. And basically, what I'd like to do is just go pretty much through uh, the third book because it's intense. People should read it, and we could just talk about different scenes. But eventually, Frodo and Sam.
Yeah, we should say,
Uh,
spoilers here. If you haven't read Tolkien,
Spoilers, yes,
yeah, we
yes,
got a lot of spoilers here. We're going to discuss what happens in the end here, so you might want to read Tolkien first if you haven't already. Then come back to the Hero Show. So so
yes.
uh, so yeah, okay. So Frodo's on his
So
way to destroy
they
the ring.
can Frodo and Sam are on their way. They continue their journey in the final book. Meanwhile, all the battles are taking place in Gondor, and Rohan, the King Theoden, joins the march to try to protect Gondor, which is the ancient realm that Aragorn, his ancestors were the kings, and in short order, they end up defeating the Nazgul, the King Nazgul, in one of the great battles at the Pelennor Fields.
Yeah,
And
that's outside the gates of Minas Tirith, right?
that's right. That's
The
outside the
capital city of
gates.
Gondor. Man, that's oh,
Yeah,
that's heroic stuff, man. I loved reading that
that's
in the
heroic
book, and then
stuff.
Peter Jackson's film version when the Rohirrim, at some point the riders of Rohan come to the rescue, and it's powerful.
And so I want to talk about one character, Eowyn, the female, who basically kills one of the pivotal scenes in Return of the King is when the top Nazgul, the king of the ring raids, he's already injured, mortally injured, um, King Theoden, and he's like a father to her, and she in a standoff with him. He says, "No man can defeat me," and she takes off her mask and says, "Yeah, but a woman can." And
Yeah,
basically, she she stabs him,
woman
but
certainly can.
actually,
Right.
right before she stabs him, he's distracted because Meriadoc stabs him in the leg with one of his swords, and that distracts him. And then she gets him in the face, and then he falls on her. All of them are injured, but she shows her worth in an incredible way. And then on the other side, Faramir
Hold on a second.
is yeah,
Hold on a
mhm,
second.
yeah,
Theoden, king of Rohan, is killed in that scene, right? Was he was duking it out with the king of the Nazgul, and he wounded
yes.
the king of the Nazgul, didn't he? And then
He
he's killed
wounded
in
him
that.
mortally. Yeah, horse fell on him, and he just had a few breaths left in him, and he just reconciled, not reconciled, but made with Eowyn, thanking her for what she had done. And
Was like a
yeah, then
daughter.
he
Was like a
dies.
daughter to him, right? She was like a
Yes,
daughter to him,
sister
right?
son. Right, that's right. And so the King Ringwraith is gone now. She's injured.
Yay!
Mary's injured. And then on the other side, in Gondor, Faramir is told by his father Denethor, basically and go back to Osgiliath and save it. And he gets injured seriously injured. Then his father, in a rage of madness, wants to burn himself and his son. But Pippin sees that Faramir's not dead. So he calls Gandalf to save Faramir's life. And that's basically what happens while Denethor lights himself on fire. And in the film, it's awesome how he runs through the top of Gondor and then falls down. Then you just see this burning, this burning image going
Now,
down
now
over the cliff.
Denethor, who was right, right, Denethor, the steward of Gondor, was he under the sway of Sauron? Was that was
Yes, he
contributed
was.
to his man? Yeah, I think he was. Right.
He had
That's
a
right. Right.
Palantir.
Right.
Andy, good point. He had a Palantir, and little by little, Sauron was clouding his mind, and he thought there was no
Right.
chance Gondor would
Right.
have. So
Right.
let's
Res-
try to make up
resistant
with this guy.
resistance is futile. You shall be
Utah,
assimilated.
exactly.
To
Yeah,
quote the Borg from Star Trek. Yeah,
yeah.
that's how I've only read it twice, not 50 times, but that's how I
That's
remember it.
okay,
But
but it's good. It's
yeah,
good, and because you enjoy it enough that I'd rather focus on the scenes that you kind of remember and then just unpack those. So yeah, Denethor in madness, he burns himself. Pippin helps to save Faramir, and they are all brought to what's called the House of Healing. Faramir, Eowyn, and Merry. And simultaneous with this, basically Frodo and Sam make it to Mount Doom, and Frodo gets to the point where he can't let go of the ring. He's ready to put it into Mount Doom, into the fire, and he doesn't. And Gollum comes back in to the scene, and he
yeah.
bites the ring.
We should yeah. Well, we should interject here. Uh, Tolkien's shown us the power of evil here. You know, the
Yes,
evil inherent in the ring. Even the hobbits could only withstand its seductive powers for so long. Even the hobbits who are pure good, at some point that evil works on you. And um, I think you see Tolkien's Catholicism here. You know, and the power of sinfulness, the power of of evil. And but
yeah, and
uh,
Frodo, who is as noble, as moral a character as there is in the story, he has one job, and his job is to cast the ring into the fire, and that's what he promised. And he gets to that pivotal moment, and he can't do it. But they both had several. Bilbo, Frodo, and Sam all had chances to kill Gollum, and none of them did it because they said he might play a role in the final decision. And sure enough, Gollum bites the ring finger, celebrates, "Oh, I have the ring," and then basically he falls into the crack of doom, and that's it. The ring is destroyed, explosions happen, and Sam and Frodo are kind of knocked out. They recover, they get out of the mountain. The eagles come and save them and bring them back to Rivendell, where they celebrate the victory. Uh,
Rivendell, the home of the elves, right?
the home of the
So,
elves, yeah,
right.
and they see that Gandalf is alive. Sam and Frodo are like, "We thought you were dead in Moria." And then there's all
Yeah.
these
Well,
celebrations, and yeah,
let me ask you something, Robert.
good.
Uh, when Gandalf, going backtrack a little bit, because the story's so complex, it's so rich, it's just
Yeah,
brilliantly done. When Gandalf was rescued from the Tower of Saruman, was it by the eagles? Was that how he escaped
yes,
from Saruman?
Gwaihir.
Yeah,
Yeah, the eagle Gwaihir saved him, and
I vaguely remember
similar
that. Let's see. Go
similarly,
ahead.
when he fought with the Balrog, similarly, he was naked on top of a mountain in the freezing cold, and Gwaihir saved him again, brought him back, and that's when
Oh
he went from
yeah,
Gandalf the Great to Gandalf the White.
it's great to have eagles as friends, man. I mean, that's really is.
That's right, America, right?
Yeah, no. I mean, who knows if in Tolkien's subconscious you have the American eagle coming to Britain's rescue against the Nazis.
twice, twice in his lifetime. In World War One and World War Two. I never made that
Especially World
connection,
War Two.
Andy. I've
Yeah,
never Yeah, I've never heard of that, but there's legitimacy there that the Eagles have this, have this connection, very possibly. I've never
yeah.
read
I mean,
anything on it, and I've done
well,
some
Tolkien denied
studies, and
that yeah, Tolkien denied,
Real
you
life
know, and
events. Yes, we talked about that.
yeah,
Hmm.
but we discussed that briefly last week. It may well have been in his subconscious. I mean, how could it not be? The shadow, as the shadow falls on Minas Tirith in the story, the shadow of National
Yeah,
Socialism is falling over, over England, and
yeah,
it's shown brilliantly in that great film Darkest Hour. What Churchill says in so many words. If we lose to the Nazis, our former colonies from beyond the sea will continue the struggle. And in the end, we'll triumph. Meaning, of course, the Americans will continue the struggle. So, I mean, I'm just guessing. It's pure speculation. I'm guessing it's in Tolkien's subconscious. Like Ayn Rand said, writers
future
right out of what she
episode.
called their sub basement. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, we have to do
Future
a hero show
episode
on
on
Churchill.
Churchill.
Yeah, we have to.
Absolutely,
We have to.
absolutely. Who I think
Probably
is the
the
greatest leader of 20th century. I
Yeah,
think.
I was just going to say that.
Hmm.
I absolutely agree. Okay,
Yeah,
now meanwhile, let me refresh my memory here because I remember vaguely from the books. Love the movies, but the books are just towering in my personal path. Yeah, isn't there a scene during the Battle of Minas Tirith while all this is going on in Mordor, back at the ranch or back at Minas Tirith? Isn't there a scene when the bad guys, Sauron's army batters down the gates? And is it the king? It was one of the Nazgul, I think, enters and Gandalf is standing opposed to him, and he said, "Get out of the way, old man," or something. We got his whole army behind us, or something. And Gandalf stands there and says something like, "Nevertheless, thou shalt not pass," or something like. I just remember this scene of heroism. Am I remembering accurately?
yeah.
What happens in that scene?
Well, it's twice. You're right. First, he says, "You shall not pass." The most famous one in the film is with when he's in Moria, and he tells the Balrog, "You shall not pass," and he takes his staff and cracks the part of the cave, but and the Balrog is falling, and then he has a whip and it pulls Gandalf down with him. So that was that one. But you're right. At the entrance of more Condor, so many names. Same
I
thing, and
know.
that's with the right the what is it like the king of the Nazgul?
Yeah,
He holds him
he
off,
says so.
and then that guy goes back. That's exactly so he goes in search of and then fights with just the next scene. He's actually the one who ends up killing King Theoden. So
Right.
Gandalf pushes him back. He leaves Gondor and goes to Pelennor Fields in
Yeah.
that,
That
and
just
then Gandalf retreats to save Faramir's life. So you
right.
got it right.
Yeah. Oh, it's great because this is the hero show, and Tolkien's capacity to project heroism is just extraordinary. The picture, even before the movie was done, years before the movie was done, when I read this for the first time, it's the picture I have in my mind of Gandalf, elderly Gandalf the White by this time, right? And not
Yes.
Gandalf the Gray anymore, in white robes and everything, and he's just standing, alone. He said, "Nevertheless, I got this whole army behind me, old man," or something. And Gandalf's so calm. He says, "Nevertheless, thou shalt not
Yeah.
pass." That's great. It's so heroic. You
It
gotta
is.
if this doesn't quicken your pulse, then you better check to see if you're still alive because this is great. This is magnificent stuff.
Yeah. One
So
thing
yeah,
I'd
there's
like to
all
do
this
later
heroism.
on,
Yeah,
actually,
yeah. Go ahead.
is contrast, Andy, the different kinds of heroes because there are several different kinds, and we might have different favorites in the novel. So anyway, after the victory, Aragorn is crowned as the king of Gondor. He heals Faramir and Eowyn, who become lovers, and they unite the two kingdoms of Rohan and Gondor. And actually,
Yeah,
that
they're
I think is the
engaged.
best love story. I think that's the best love story because the other ones tend to be preordained. Aragorn and Arwen, and even Sam with Rosie, like they've liked each other, and after the victory, they end up marrying, which is beautiful. But Eowyn and Faramir don't know each other, and you actually see the evolution of their love, and I think that's my favorite love part of the story. And then after
For
the
good reason.
victory,
But hold on,
it's
hold on
time
a
to
second.
go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hold on a second, because we haven't discussed the battle outside the gates of Mordor. Uh, right after. Let me see if I remember this correctly.
Yes.
Aragorn goes and gets the dead who have some debt to pay. Uh, right?
Yeah.
And the dead come, and and the orcs and everything in Sauron's army. Oh, the church is out now. We got and the dead swarm over Sauron's army, and they just and so they win the battle outside of Minas Tirith, the capital of
Yes.
Gondor. And Aragorn, knowing what's going on with Frodo, realizes he's got to distract Sauron. So he gets an army together, right? And he marches on Mordor to distract Sauron from his real danger. The
Yes.
Frodo's attempted to destroy the ring. What were they called? The captains of the West, I think. Aragorn
Yes.
and his colleague. Again,
Numenor. Yes. Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
Again, the you see the relationship with real life because the danger is coming from the east, from Germany. The captains of the West
Mm.
march on Mordor, and Sauron unleashes this tremendous army, which dwarfs Aragorn's army, and they battle, and it's in the midst of that battle, isn't it, that Frodo or Gollum actually
Yes.
destroys the ring, and Sauron's power is just obliterated. It was in the midst of that battle
Vanquished.
outside the Black Gates, wasn't it? When the ring was destroyed.
Yes. That's right. Perfectly symbolized, perfectly portrayed in the film because you see, there's goblins, there's these big things that they're being overpowered. Aragorn and his uh, team, for lack of a better term, they're being overpowered. But then once Barad-dûr, which is the Mount Doom, we didn't say last week the two towers. One referent is Barad-dûr in Mordor, and then Orthanc in um, Isengard. So that's the reference of what are
And
the two towers. And
Barad-dûr is Sauron's tower. Sauron's tower, right?
yes, and that's the one that it explodes. It's wiped out after the ring is destroyed, and all the bad guys see that, and they basically flee for their life. And that's when the good guys know, okay, we've won. Frodo has accomplished his mission. Clearly, he's accomplished his mission. And so the distraction, and actually, once Sauron realizes that Frodo is in Mount Doom trying to destroy the ring, so he has all the Nazgul leave where they are to try to go to the mount, and they get there too late. So that's exactly all of these confluence of events end up where the good guys outsmart them, and they're more moral, and consequently those things help them with the victory.
Right. And looked at from a purely literary aspect, the
Hmm.
parallel action that Tolkien portrays throughout the story. You're following one line of action is Frodo's attempt to destroy the ring, and then the other line of action is the armies of Gondor and Rohan trying to fight off first the orcs of Saruman and the super orcs, and then the armies of Sauron. And you're on. There are always cliffhangers. You're on the edge of your seat. Tolkien's a master at this. He leaves you at some climactic moment in one of these engagements, one of these struggles, to then go back to the other one, and he just goes back and forth. And the parallel action is stunning, and it all comes together at the end. The tension that builds. The captains of the West are outside the Black Gates of Mordor. They're luring Sauron to battle. Come out and fight us, Sauron. Trying to get his full attention. At the same time, Frodo's trying to destroy the ring. It all comes together at the end. It's a masterpiece. It's just so well done.
Yeah. And Andy, I'll say one important point there. um, the bad guys, because they know the ring is only good for power, they can't even conceive that someone like Frodo would actually destroy it. Okay, so that's one reason they succeed, is that they just think it's going to be an outright war in which they have greater power, physical power. But in the good guys know, in the Council of Elrond in Rivendell, they know that this is the reason why the only way to victory is destroying the ring. So Sauron never thinks in a million years that they'd actually go there and destroy it. And I think that's an important
Yeah,
point
yeah,
that
yeah. It's a very good
Tolkien
point.
is making.
Yeah,
Hmm.
That's a very good point, Robert. Reminds me, what did King George say when somebody told him that George Washington was going to resign? Right? He didn't. King George didn't believe it. Right? He thought Washington was going to make himself into the king. It's
Yeah,
hard for power lusters to grasp that good men don't seek power over their brothers and sisters. And I think
yeah,
at a deeper level of evil, King George is minor. Hitler is a much deeper level of evil, and I think Sauron again. I gotta believe. I'm speculating here. I gotta believe that somewhere in Tolkien's subconscious, Hitler is looming there. In the character of Sauron. And could Hitler conceive of somebody having this tremendous power and not using it for conquest, but destroying it? He couldn't. I don't think so. I think you're right. It's a brilliant point in the story, and
hmm,
I think the good guys realize that even if we use the ring to defeat Sauron, in the act of defeating Sauron, it's gonna seduce us to the dark side, and we're gonna become like Sauron. So what would be the good of
yeah,
of of killing a foreign dictator if we just then become indigenous dictators? That's not good. No, we have to destroy this. We have to destroy this thing. So it's
yeah.
Tolkien's
Great point.
plot, and yeah,
Yeah.
Tolkien's plot, and the themes that he's weaving into this plot. It's just you want to go. I mean, this stuff is just a masterpiece.
Let me just piggyback on
Yeah,
the
go ahead.
King George. Do you remember what he said when he found out Washington is going to go back and become a
Wait,
farmer? He said if he does that, he's
he-
the greatest man alive.
right?
Okay, because he couldn't, right, in the world of European lineage, that was just not conceived of. And so here is a different point. Here is a different kind of man, the George Washington, the American kind of hero. And so and this is actually something that this might be the time to bring it up, the different kinds of heroes. So the Aragorn coronation, to me, it's a bit too European. All right, I gotta admit, as an American, kings don't really impress
Yeah,
me.
well,
That's
well, give
why
Tolkien
you
cut Tolkien some slack. He's a European, and they still love the Queen and everything.
they do. But here's my thinking on this. I tend to skip. That goes on a little bit longer than I'm really comfortable with. But the the hobbits know they need to go back to the Shire. So just wrapping up the story is that Saruman had one more tooth left in him, okay, and he started to destroy the Shire. Now we can argue whether it's by industrialization. We already talked about that last time, and you and I agree industrialization is beautiful, and we disagree with Tolkien's view there. But they destroyed the Shire in the sense that there are rules. You can't come in at night. There are bullies basically. So all the hobbits are living in fear. Now all of a
Yeah,
sudden,
Saruman's
four.
taken on. What's his name? Sharky? Is that his name? See,
Yes.
again, you love the name Sharky. Denoting sharks. It's again, it's well done by Tolkien.
Yeah. And so they go back, they confront Saruman, and here's one of the most beautiful scenes for me in the novel is that they have a chance to kill him and they choose not to. Frodo says, "No, enough blood has been spilt. We're not going to kill him. He once was a great being, a great wizard of a high order." And Saruman is pissed off because he really wanted Frodo to have vengeance on him, but Frodo's like the better man, so to speak. But Frodo also tells Wormtongue, "You can go. You have free will." And Saruman says, "No, he killed this hobbit and he killed that hobbit." And in a fit of rage, Wormtongue is the one who actually kills. You asked last week who kills Saruman. It's Wormtongue who
Okay.
ends up killing him. And the humor in Lord of the Rings. This is like I laugh out loud like 50 times every time I read it. But so this was near Bag End, which is where all the hobbits gather, and the spot that Saruman was killed, they wanted to name it, and one of the names was Sharky's End. Okay, and in other words, the end of Sharky is going to be here, and they just ended up calling it New Row or something like that. But the cleverness of Tolkien,
Right,
to me, it's just absolutely breathtaking. So then they
right.
finish up.
Well,
They
again,
revitalize.
he's English. Who but the English would name the point where the countryside meets the ocean, call it Land's End? I mean, I mean that's Land's End. I mean, yeah, that fits. That's that's
Right,
perfect. But wait, let me
right.
ask you before you go on. So who kills Wormtongue? I know Wormtongue gets killed in that scene. Some of
I
some of the hobbits
It's
kill him.
yeah,
I think.
there is a scuffle between the ruffians, and a few hobbits die, and yeah, I believe Wormtongue is a casualty there, and it might even be one of the bad guy. They convinced some men, like Ted Sandyman was one of the ones that they kind of convinced to become a ruffian and try to take over the Shire. But yeah, so
Again, the
Wormtongue
great
is gone.
right, yeah,
The,
the great
the
names,
bad guys are gone.
Sandyman,
Yeah,
the great name, Sandyman. Like you don't need Sandman. We're gonna put you to sleep.
that's right.
You impose the big sleep on you because I'm the Sandman. Tolkien's the
Yeah,
master of that as well as many other
he is.
aspects.
And the gift, if we go back to what Galadriel gave to the different hobbits, she gave Sam a box of soil that he didn't even remember until he was already there, and that was to replenish all the land so that trees could grow again. Sam is the gardener. He's the man who loves to see things grow. He loves life, all forms of life that bring goodness. And so the Shire is revitalized, and then Frodo realizes he's still wounded. And after 2 years of trying to be in the Shire, Sam marries Rosie, has a child, and then in the final scene, uh, they're brought to what's called the where the boats go sailing west to the Grey Havens, which is probably a parallel to heaven.
Yeah,
Bilbo, Frodo, Gandalf, and many of the elves go on that boat sailing west. And then the three hobbits, Merry, Pippin, and Sam, go back to the Shire. Sam gets home, puts his daughter on his lap, and says, "I'm back." And that's the last line in the saga. And uh, you know, as you know, Andy, when these long sagas end, you're sad. I'm
yeah.
always sad when it's over because you want more. So I drove, a couple of weeks ago, I drove back to New York from Vermont, about 2,000 miles, and I listened to the whole books, the whole saga during the drive, and
Wow.
this is how I get to do it like 50 times. So Carrie and I just finished reading it like a month ago, and then I listened to it again during this long drive. And
I
when
could.
it's over,
Yeah,
it's like you don't want it to end. That's how
I
you
know.
feel when Ayn Rand's, The Fountainhead. I always want it to start over again. You know.
Well,
So
didn't
yeah,
Leonard
your thoughts
Peikoff
on
say
that?
when? Yeah, didn't Leonard Peikoff say the first time he read The Fountainhead, he just when he finished it, he just started over again. He read it like seven straight
Yeah,
times. I think
yeah,
I might be
yeah.
misremembering, but yeah, but I
I
know he went right
Me
back to
too.
it after. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, me too.
it's such a great book. Yes, just a couple of points before we dive into the greatness of of just its literary greatness. Uh, they sail west to the Grey Havens again. I think the symbolism there,
Yes.
crossing the Atlantic, in effect towards the New World. The bastion of the West towards the United States, which saved Europe from the Nazis, and of course, all of this happens later, but also saved Europe from the Soviets. Uh, but yeah, the West symbolizes life, and and morality, and and all things good. The best of you can see Tolkien's not one of these woke, cancel culture kind of guys, or expounding, expostulating, critical race theory. Everything about America is racist. He recognizes the greatness of America and of Western civilization. And I think you're right. The Grey Havens
Yeah.
is a kind of place. It's Valhalla like, or heaven like, the final resting place for
Yes.
these heroes who certainly deserve it. And their battles are done. Their battles are won, and now they go to their just desserts. But we should just
Yeah, and
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, exactly Western civilization. And one of Tolkien's goal with the whole Lord of the Rings, the saga, was to create a mythology for England, because England didn't have their own mythology. They imported from the Norse and from different cultures, and he had a specific purpose with this entire saga, was to create an English, particularly English saga of mythology. And I think I think he succeeded in spades. And I'll tell you, the first time I went, 1987, I went to England, and I felt it. I was like, wow, I'm in the. It's so green, especially
Yeah.
as a New Yorker. I mean, and even London is like 50 times greener than New York. But then I went to like Bournemouth, which is Tolkien actually lived there in the southern part of England, and I just felt like this is his world. I mean, he would not say that nowadays because it's still too much industrialism, but so his goal was to create this particularly English mythology with the Lord of the Rings. And again, I
Yeah,
think he
it's
succeeded
interesting. Yeah,
there.
the beautiful greenery of large parts of the English countryside is obviously the origin for the idea of the Shire. It's
That's right. Yeah.
beautiful greenery. It's
Hmm.
interesting.
Hmm.
One of our other English literary heroes, Arthur Conan Doyle, very often
Yes.
has Sherlock Holmes and Watson out on the moors. Not the greenest part of England, but these desolate parts. Like in the Hound of the Baskervilles. And he really, he also a literary genius, creates this scene where you fear. You're on the moor. It's dark. It's desolate. The fog's rolling in, and there's this creature out there that's going to eat you. Well, different aspect of the English countryside, and Conan
Hmm.
Doyle uses that brilliantly, as does Tolkien in creating the Shire. But
Yeah.
yeah, the we have to say, we were discussing before the show, Rob, and you pointed out. I mean, part of what Tolkien has done here is he created a whole genre. I mean, he
Yes.
pretty much created the fantasy genre in this work, did he not? I think he did.
Yeah, I think so. Let's put it this way: if he didn't create it, he certainly mastered it. And everything there's before Tolkien is pretty much nothing memorable, and then after Tolkien is everything else, starting Harry Potter, and then some of the more recent ones that have gained traction. But yeah, and we talk about how literature, you create a universe, and that's what he did. He created this incredible fantasy universe that has so many uh, what's the term, like allegories to real
Mhm.
world. So if we look at all the different races, so we have men, we have hobbits, we have elves, dwarves, wizards. Each one, you could say they're collectives, but each hero within those races is an individualist. So Gimli is different from the dwarves in some ways. Legolas different from the elves, and and Aragorn certainly is different from prior men. His lineage had the chance to destroy the ring, and chose not to. So I like also the individualism and the free will part in the story. How and the hobbits are more docile before Bilbo goes out and has an adventure, and then Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin go out and have adventures. And this shows that you're not just pigeonholed into whatever race you're in. And then also the other thing, at the end of the saga, Gimli and Legolas promise to see each other's lands. So these are two different races who have been at odds for
Yeah,
generations, and
right.
they choose to form a bond of fellowship. And here's where I think, again, the idea of fellowship and friendship, nobody tops Tolkien in my mind. Nobody tops, and I think that comes from his personal side. If you want to switch gears to the Tolkien movie, we see that in the Tea Club, where he's with these boys, and they want to change the world. Helmheim, right? That's their and then later with the Inklings, the written society that they want to have these works. So Tolkien had a lot of units for friendship, and
Hmm.
which he equates with a fellowship. And that's why I think he's a master at portraying that. So many times they say "dear hobbits" in the Lord of the Rings, and that's just this term of endearment for people that you love, particularly as friends.
Right, and you're right. The the elves and the dwarves had been at odds. They didn't really like each other. They weren't mortal enemies, but they didn't like each other. And there's a kind of mitigated form of racism there. And but these individualists, Tolkien shows them they make moral choices. And they're not determined by their race to be an enemy of this other race. And
Hmm.
Gimli and Legolas, with a little rivalry, at first, but they recognize the moral stature of each other, and they become very, very close friends and comrades. And yeah, it definitely shows Tolkien showing that we, and they're stand-ins for human beings. Uh, that we, excuse me, we can all make, all have the capacity to make moral choices, and we could throw off any types of racism. The determinist view inherent in racism is just false. We care about good people regardless of what race. Good beings regardless of what race. And Aragorn, yeah, you're right about Aragorn. He's not the power luster that his ancestors were. He knows the ring has to be destroyed, where his ancestors wanted it, so they could gain power. So yeah, that's an important aspect in this story. But I think, you know, we need to just discuss the complexity of the plot. Oh, actually, before we even get to the literary greatness here, you're right. A lot of people may not. You mentioned the Tolkien movie. A lot of people may not even be aware of it because it was not kind of an indie film, a
Hmm.
Tolkien biopic a couple of years ago. Was the name of it just Tolkien? What was the name of that film?
Yes, yes,
Yeah, I
Tolkien.
recommend
Hmm.
it. Yeah, I recommend it. Everybody, you could probably find it up on on Amazon or YouTube or someplace. It showed Tolkien's life, very effectively. That he was an orphan, right? His father died. There we go. His father died when
Yeah,
he was
the
young. His
first
mother
part of his
died.
life. It's pretty
Right.
much the first part of his life. He lived to a long age, but right
Yeah,
up until the heart.
1892 to 1973. So he was 80. Was that make him 81? Yeah, so he was an
Hmm.
orphan, as a child. Is in the orphanage. He meets his future wife, Edith. Was that her name?
Yes.
That's great. So there, she's a couple of years older than him. I assume this is true. This is true to life. She was a pianist. It shows that these were kind of cheeky kids in the British terminology. They go to these fancy restaurants to sit up in the balcony. They take sugar cubes and throw them down on the heads of these high class people. Low down, get kicked out of the restaurant. It's very good on Tolkien's life. It shows what turns out to be really sad. These brilliant kids that he's friends with when they're at school, they're all so talented. One's a poet, and one's a composer, and one's a painter, and then there's Tolkien, and they're all, you can just see these kids could do great things artistically. And then World War I hits, and two of them are killed in the war. The other one, the composer, was Christopher. Was that his name?
Yeah.
Becomes like shell shocked in that old terminology. Post, what is they call it today? Post traumatic stress
PTSD.
disorder.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Hmm.
But shell shock works better, I think. And
More
yeah,
accurate.
yeah, and vivid. This is vivid, and yeah, it shows the horrors of World War I. Yeah, we touched on it last week. It makes you think, how much more advanced would we be if it wasn't for mankind's endless warfare, slavery, the subjugation of women, the endless use of brute force to overpower, other cities, nations, tribes, whatever. The geniuses, Tolkien's friends, may well have gone on to be the kind of artistic geniuses that he himself was, but they're killed in this brutal war. And how much genius have we lost? All of this initiation of force in different forms throughout history. It's impossible to know. It's the foregone benefits that are impossible to know, because we can't know what didn't come into existence. Because all these geniuses were killed, or suppressed or enslaved, as youth. It shows that tragic part of it. Tolkien himself obviously survives the war. Shows the film shows the horrors of the war, the imagery of it. I think isn't there a scene where some of the imagery is you can see the gestation of what later becomes the Nazgul, the Black Riders. You know, so I mean,
Mhm.
Tolkien has, like you said, he has a lot of units here for good and bad. He's got the units of, of his very close friends and his wife, who was a pianist. These very creative people, and then he's got the units, from the horrors that he experienced during World War I, that he from which he can create the Nazgul and Sauron, and and the these orcs, and all these evil doers. Yeah, the Tolkien biopic is very good. I strongly recommend it, and it has the veneration of Tolkien that you want. It's not one of these. I remember years ago they did a movie on Beethoven, and it showed his genius and the beauty of his music, but it focused a lot on what a louse, what a nasty person he was, and I didn't like that.
That's the
Wasn't
Gary
necessary.
Oldham.
Yeah, yeah,
Is
yeah,
that the
yeah. I
Gary
think so.
Oldham?
Yeah, I don't remember the
Yeah,
name. I think
yeah.
Gary. Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
whereas the Tolkien film really specializes on his genius and all the greatness of his literary creations. Just one last thing I want to say in this: we could contrast the Beethoven film with Scorsese's The Aviator. I know we've discussed
Yeah,
this because
yeah.
the
Hmm.
Howard Hughes story, it's impossible to tell it without showing the mental illness that eventually
Yeah.
wrecked his life. And I thought Scorsese and DiCaprio did a good job in focusing on the heroism. You had to show the insanity. It was too big a part of his life. It couldn't be it couldn't be excised from it. But I thought in the Beethoven film, yeah, Beethoven might have been a curmudgeon and difficult guy to get along with, but he wasn't mentally ill in the way that poor Howard Hughes was. And I thought that part of it could be greatly reduced in that film. But in the Tolkien film, I don't know, if Tolkien was a flawed person. I don't know that much about his life, but the Tolkien film focuses on his genius and his goodness, and it's an excellent film about a true literary hero. So I certainly recommend it.
And also, Andy, so here's why Sam. I'll just tell you why Sam is my favorite hero in the novels. His overwhelming optimism. Every time there's a setback, and even Frodo's like, "I don't think we'll ever see our friends again," and Sam is like, "We might, Mister Frodo, we might." And then when they finish, they destroy the ring. Frodo's given up, and Sam he always has hope, and we see that in the Tolkien film, despite everything, every obstacle that's thrown at Tolkien. He still has this hint of optimism that, yeah, I still have something in me. And then the way the film ends is he's with his children, and he just comes up with this idea, which is the germ of the Hobbit. Now that part is not accurate. So I just want to go to his personal life. He taught at Oxford. All right, he was a teacher, a linguist, a philologist teacher, and one day he's grading papers, and that's a good job, by English standards, by any standards. Being a professor at Harvard, at Oxford, forget about Harvard, Oxford is like, that's, you don't get too much higher. But he's grading these papers, and uh, it's somewhat a little bit of a drudgery. And he turns the page, and there's a blank sheet in front of him, and he just thinks, "What should I do with this blank sheet?" And he writes, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit," which is the first line in The Hobbit. And so, and all of these novels were his part-time job. Okay, in the sense that he did them on his off time. If we go to you personally, Andy, you're a writer and a teacher, but the you know you're not teaching so much that it affects your writing. For you, the hierarchy is, I'm a writer, and then I'll teach, to enlighten students and to make some steady income. But Tolkien had as prestigious a job, full-time job, as one could ask for in Britain. And he just starts dashing out these, world-changing novels in his spare time. I think that's another level of his achievement that is not, it's not widely known.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And we should point out the we've already discussed briefly the complexity of the plot structure is it's that
Right.
in itself is a great literary achievement. The parallel action all that runs all through the story. One, the attempt to destroy the ring, and related to that, we have to fight off the bad guys of Saruman and especially of Sauron. We have to distract Sauron, buy Frodo time to destroy the ring, and it's done with great courage on the part of
Hmm.
Gandalf, Aragorn, Theoden King, is all these heroes. It's just the plot is just it's all woven together brilliantly. And then how do we describe this episode of the Hero Show? Tolkien's world of vivid moral conflict,
Yeah.
the moral themes that Tolkien weaves into this of okay, it's simple. This is this good. There's a good versus evil story. It's not Atlas Shrugged where we shouldn't expect it to be. We don't not
Right.
where we show that good versus evil reduces to is really epistemological as rationality versus irrationality, and irrationality is like Heinz, 57 different varieties, but Ayn Rand probes the depths of all of them brilliantly. Tolkien's is a simpler good versus evil story. It's power lust versus freedom. And the desire to live, under freedom, and we don't want the power. We're going to destroy the ring and everything. Nevertheless, it's a vivid good versus evil story, not deep philosophically the way Ayn Rand's books are, but neither is anybody else. Actually, I should say, good versus evil is explored at a deeper levels by various great novelists. Dostoevsky, who's a devout Russian Orthodox Christian, and he sees it as the godliness versus ungodliness. So he's profoundly mistaken, but he plumbs the depths of these characters, to show what it's like to be, like a moral saint, and what it's like what it means to be a sinner. Tolkien doesn't go to that depth in his characters. It's a much simpler good versus evil story. Nevertheless, power lust versus freedom, and the rejection of power lust. Nevertheless, it's an important point in human life, and Tolkien at that level, Tolkien masters it brilliantly and integrates it 100% into the story. It's right there in the story. You don't have to have people pontificating about it like in some novels. Ayn Rand has characters give speeches, but only after she's already dramatized, and the meaning of the events, and then the speeches, whether it's Rourke or Galt, then the speeches explain it theoretically. But some novels, like Thomas Mann's *The Magic Mountain*, there's really no significance to the events, and the characters just sit in a sanitarium and they discuss ideas which have no bearing to the events of the story. Well, that's not Tolkien. Tolkien dramatizes this power lust versus freedom theme, in the events of the story, and you don't need a lot of theoretical explanation. It's right there in the story. He does it vividly. It's very well done. It's
Hmm.
very well integrated, and he
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
and the characters are fascinating. He doesn't explore them the way they like Sauron, for example. If this was Dostoevsky, he would go into Sauron's life, his background, his premises, his values, how he became a sinner, and everything. But Dostoevsky is one of the greatest novelists of world literature. He's a genius, and it's interesting that Tolkien doesn't go into Sauron's mind. It's an interesting choice on his part, and I think that we don't know anything about Sauron makes him even more menacing, makes him even more baleful, because he's this unknown. He's got great power, and he's this unknown miscreant. And if Tolkien had plumbed the depths of his character the way Dostoevsky did, I think it would be fascinating to see Tolkien's view of evil. But I think it would diminish the balefulness of Sauron's character. And I think it's an interesting choice on Tolkien's part. I think he
Hmm.
gave precedence to his plot, over
Yeah.
characterization. That I want this guy to be super menacing. And he's out there. Yeah, he's ominous as anybody could be. We don't know who he is or why he is, and he's just this tremendous menace. That it's encroaching on Western civilization. And it's just Again,
Hmm.
I think it was a wise choice. I think Dostoevsky would have made a different choice, but these are literary choices that great writers make. And I like Tolkien the way that impacts his plot and makes the bad guy even more baleful. You know,
Yeah, I agree. Actually, that last description kind of reminds me of the film Jaws. How we hear the music and we see from behind the shark. We don't see the shark for like the first half of the movie, but we know how menacing it is. We see the
good
effect
point.
that the
Yeah,
shark
good.
does,
That's a
you know,
good.
and
That's a good
that's
analogy.
more frightening. That's more
Right.
frightening than the actual, because once you see it, you're not okay. Yeah, that's what it is,
No,
and
that's a good
so
analogy. And Spielberg's a master storyteller. Spielberg knows how to tell a
yeah,
story, right, and generate
yeah.
suspense and tension. That's a good point. I hadn't even thought of that. Maybe because I've never seen
Mhm.
Jaws.
Oh,
I've never
really?
seen it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't want. I don't even want to think about it. I love the ocean too
Oh,
much. I knew when that movie
wow.
came out in
1975.
1975. Yeah, 19.
Yeah.
I knew I was. If I ever saw that movie, I was never going to go swimming in the ocean again. So I have deliberately avoided that film. What is that?
Okay. I
46
did
years
and
now.
I did. So let's go to talk about movies. Um, I know you really enjoyed the films. I have all three on
Yeah,
DVD.
Peter Jackson. Peter
I'll,
Jackson did a good job.
so let me tell you um, my story. December 19, 2001 was the first of the three. That all three came out December 2001, 2, and 3. I went to the midnight show, and 3 a.m. I walked home pissed off because all I did was see everything they did wrong in the movie or changed from the books because I was the purist, of Lord of the Rings. But at the time I was married, and every Christmas I'd go down to Mexico and I'd see the film a few more times down there with subtitles. And little by little, I would look at it more as a work of art and not, as a film and not necessarily a complete, interpretation of the books. And then when the extended DVDs came out, which have like an hour extra footage that's exactly from the book, I was completely sold on the genius of Peter Jackson. So yes, I agree with you. The films are masterpieces, but as the pure side of me, each year, December 2001, 2, and 3, I walked out of it's a 3 hour show. You go there at midnight and I tossing and turning. Why did they change this? Why did they do that? But now I just enjoy it as a
Well,
film. So
you are
that's
nothing if not predictable, Robert. I mean, I just, I just like, you're such a aficionado of Tolkien himself. Let me see. I get your point. On Peter Jackson's behalf, it, novel and film, they're different genres. There's novels are very conceptual, and you could get inside characters' heads. A lot of things you could do in a novel. It may be the most comprehensive art form because it's so versatile. You could be in a
yes.
character's head. You could be outside external action. You could integrate the you two. You could be all over the world, different time, and place. Film is very visual, and so it's a different genre. It's much more difficult to get inside characters' heads in a film than you can in a novel. And so I think Peter Jackson made some choices, but I get your point. I can see why a purist like you would be annoyed by certain things. But what I loved about the films is I thought that he captured he I think he clearly venerated Tolkien's work. He clearly loves it. And it's a visual, cinematic salute to Tolkien across
Yes.
across the decades. And he captured the essence of the key point to me about, as a hero worshiper, about Tolkien, the heroism, the extraordinary heroism of the lead characters. And Peter Jackson showed it in Gandalf, in Aragon, in the Hobbits. Yeah. So I thought overall, I get your point. About certain changes that he made. To transpose literate, novel to very visual art form of cinema. But overall, I thought he did a really good job of transposing Tolkien's work to the big screen, as the silver screen, as they say.
Yeah, I'll agree. I totally agree with you, especially if we talk about the landscape that Tolkien describes. Peter Jackson got that perfectly.
Was it New
New
Zealand? Was it a lot of
Zealand
that film?
is,
Yeah, it was New Zealand, right?
yeah. And
Yeah.
someday I'll do that tour. I haven't been.
Yeah,
I've been to
so
Australia
I'm
twice,
sure
but
you
not New
will.
Zealand.
Yeah, I'm sure you will.
I
You better
will do that. Uh,
take your niece with you. That she's been all over the world, but that's one place she hasn't been.
True. Yeah, we might do it together. But Peter Jackson did that right. Tolkien would admire the way Jackson showed visually the world of Lord of the Rings. And for me, the music is another aspect. I Film scores are a big part of my enjoyment of film because I love music so much. And years later, after the films came out, I think it was 2010, 11, and 12, they showed at Radio City, they had the film on screen, and Howard Shore, the composer, had actually, he conducted an orchestra playing the entire film score. And that was a weird experience because you see how much music is. There's not too many scenes that there's just dialogue and the musicians are actually resting because music is, it's low in certain parts even when there is dialogue, and then during sweeping scenery there's that like heroic brass sections that and then the beautiful Hobbit flute parts as well. So seeing the film with the live orchestra and the composer conducting was also a different kind of experience that I enjoyed as part of this interpretation of like you said, a different genre.
Yeah, yeah, and I think at least one last point we should make, and discuss this in reference to Ayn Rand's points in the Romantic Manifesto, where she talks about romantic realism. You know, that the romantic, of course, is that human beings make moral choices and consequently they can rise to great stature. And the realism part, of course, is it's set in the world as we know it, the world as it is. And romantic realism, well done. And she talks her novels, Hugo, Dostoevsky. It's got tremendous power in the hands of these kind of geniuses because you're right there in the real world and you see the impact that these heroes have and the moral principles that animate them have in the real world. But there's different types of genres. And fantasy is still, a legitimate genre, and especially in the hands of a master like Tolkien. It's just that one, I think we have to do a more thorough job of suspending disbelief because we're dealing with hobbits,
Yes.
and various very
And
Balrogs and
magic. Hmm.
magic. That's right, wizardry. That's right. We have to
Hmm.
suspend disbelief more extensively, and then I think it's a second act of conceptualization to take the themes and apply them to the real world because we're not in the real world. So the good versus evil story, we've discussed it. Wow, this is like Britain standing up to the Nazis. Like the shadow falls over Minas Tirith, where the shadows
Hmm.
fall, the shadow of National Socialism falling over Britain, and we could in a related but distinct act of thinking, we could take Tolkien's themes from his world, from his fantasy world, and apply them to the real world. But we're not actually in the real world, so I understand Ayn Rand's preference for romantic realism. But having said that, fantasy is a legitimate literary genre, and certainly in the hands of a master like Tolkien. This is why you and I and gazillions of other readers love Tolkien.
Yeah. 100 million copies his books have sold. It's just in all different languages. And a couple of years ago, J.P. Morgan Library had an exhibit on Tolkien, and I picked up this book. The other thing is he actually drew. He was an artist himself, so yeah, he would draw different scenes from different. Here's actually his cover, his original cover for
Ah,
the Hobbit
nice.
book, and um, and also I picked up some tea, Bilbo Baggins tea,
Well, that's
which I'm
perfect.
drinking
That's
right now
perfect for you.
in
Right, right,
honor
right.
of him, right? So, so yeah, there's a lot there, and I was happy for J.P. Morgan Library to put on this stuff because, again, last time I mentioned how Tolkien would first draw maps, and they even kind of talk about this, if you remember, going back to the Tolkien film when he's with Derek Jacobi, who was the linguist teacher. He's like, well, whatever language you create, it has to tell a story. So the storytelling aspect, and then the maps where he would visualize, geographically what that universe would entail. All of these built up, the integration of all of these aspects just escalated his storytelling ability there. So yeah, that's what, you know one reason. Again, I'm just a major fan. And the last thing that I have, Andy, is, again, I talked my initial introduction from my friend Chris was, he says you can't love Zeppelin and Rush without knowing Tolkien. So the song Ramble On mentions Gollum, uh, Battle of Evermore, the Ringwraiths, Misty Mountain Hop, all these references, even
Right.
Stairway to Heaven, the first line about all that glitters is gold. The thing about Aragorn is that not all that is gold glitters, and the king will once again be crowned. And so the music is, personally, especially, my favorite bands have that tribute to Tolkien. So that just escalates my personal appreciation of his work. And so yeah, the guy is, that's one reason, Andy. Yeah, 50 times I've read, listened to, or watched, different versions of his work.
Yeah, I understand. And I would just say my last word on Tolkien is, um, he created an entire universe of compelling conflict,
Yes.
vivid moral, of compelling struggles, of vivid moral conflict featuring towering heroism. That's what I love about
Yeah.
Tolkien. The imaginativeness of it, the creativity, and above all, the heroism. That's what I love about Tolkien. Why I'll always love
Yeah.
Tolkien, and now I'll
Yeah.
never read it 50 times, even if I listen to the audio tapes over and over again. But I am now. I'm determined to read it for a third time. It's been many years since I've read Tolkien, so
Mhm.
this has
Yeah.
you've inspired me. You've inspired me, Robert. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Well, also, for who are the ones who, what age period are people most looking for heroes? When they're young and they have all
Right,
these
sure.
ambitions and hopes. They haven't grown cynical yet. They don't have to grow cynical, but sadly, a lot of people lose that heroic, that hero worship that inspires them to move on. And I think the fact that Tolkien initially wrote for his own children, to be moral, to show differences between right and wrong, and good and evil, and choosing one over the other, is, so this is why, for teenagers particularly, that's why I became absorbed with it. And also to just keep up that benevolence over the decades is why I, personally would keep returning, because yeah, I want to see those battles again. I want to hear those choices that they had, the choices of Master Samwise. What a title for a chapter.
Right. Yeah.
As far as
Yeah.
that whole, if we boil things down to exactly what you said, Andy, the heroism, it's like, yeah, choice is a big part of that. So for
Oh,
that,
absolutely.
absolutely, yeah. Mhm.
Absolutely. Well, I think we can pat ourselves on the back. I think we've done the master credit. I said
I
we
agree.
could salute Tolkien,
Thank you.
and I want to wish you, Robert, have a more heroic day. Have a
You
heroic
too, Andy.
weekend. Yeah, thank you, everybody out there in Hero Land. Let's be inspired to lead a more heroic life. And Robert and I will be
Yes.
back next week on the with the Hero Show.
Yes. Let's do it.